Coming up on this episode of Flirtations, we're talking limerence, longing, and connection with our guest, Amanda McCracken, a journalist, speaker, and host of the insightful The Longing Lab podcast and author of the forthcoming book, When Longing Becomes Your Lover. Inside the episode, we break down limerence and the limerence cycle and how this intense and often obsessive infatuation we may develop for someone ultimately keeps us from developing the connections and relationships we desire. We'll also explore the neuroscience behind limerence and how our brains are wired to desire what we don't have, and how this longing can become a comforting distraction. But that's not all. Y'all came through with questions, and we've got answers to these questions, like how to break the limerence cycle. What if I just can't get over someone? Is there a timeline for this? I have a crush. How can I not go into full limerence? What are some strategies for obsessive thoughts? What role does social media and the dating apps play in all of this? And as we begin to wrap up the conversation, Amanda shares her decision to wait until 41 to have sex, which garnered national attention and sparked conversations about intimacy, self-worth, and the societal narratives that shape our romantic lives. All right, flirties, let's prepare to examine our desires and the stories we tell ourselves about love. Now time to meet Amanda.
I heard you wanted to flirt. I heard you wanted to flirt. I heard you wanted to flirt. Hello, my name is Benjamin. I'm the flirt coach and a gay Libra. Everyone has an inner flirt.
Hey, flirty.
Live, laugh, flirt.
Work the flirt.
Work the flirt. Delulu is the Salulu. Expert on the flirt.
Hey, flirty. There's always another flirt.
Everyone has an inner flirt. Get out of your head and into the flirt.
Flirties, on the show today, we're going to be talking about limerence, longing, and the craving for connection with speaker, journalist, author of the book, When Longing Becomes Your Lover, and the host of the Longing Lab podcast. It's Amanda McCracken. Hello and welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me, Benjamin. It's great to be here.
Oh my gosh. I'm thrilled. Thank you for being on Flirtations today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about limerence and longing.
Me as well. Do you by chance have 32 hours for this conversation?
I know there's a lot to unpack and still a lot that's, I think a lot of psychologists and scientists are still really unpacking around this. So
yes. We have a lot to get to. I'm very interested. We're going to try and get to as many questions as we can. But up first, in the About You section of the interview, I wanted to offer a twist today. Normally, I ask some version of the question, right? How did you get started in this work? What inspired you? Something along those lines. But if I may, I'd like to read the intro to your podcast, The Longing Lab.
Sure thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it just really, really struck me. And in the voiceover intro for your podcast, you say, in this very moment, we are all longing for something. In fact, neuroscience proves our brains are wired to crave what we don't have. And longing can be a comforting distraction and a catalyst for creativity, but it can also become a debilitating crutch when it leads to idealizing other times, previous lovers, lost loved ones, and unknown destinations. And in that intro, you also describe yourself as a longing addict, but maybe now a recovering longing addict. Tell me more about that.
I mean, from the standpoint of the longing addict thing, I think I've learned to curb my longing into more of a healthy, creative, nurturing way, and be more aware of it when it kind of eats away at potentially positive experiences. That's kind of what I mean by that.
Okay. Yeah, because this is, the connection is my mission as the flirt coach. That's my bread and butter. And I think when we compare that with longing and limerence, it's so interesting because, as you say right here in your intro, that we're all longing for something. And this is Flirtations. A lot of us are longing for the relationship, the person, right? But I think it applies really to so many different areas of our lives.
Yeah, and I think longing keeps us from the connection. In a lot of ways, It's like this safe place.
Yeah.
And it allows you to just, especially from a romantic longing standpoint, it allows you just to, stay in your imagination and idealize that person that you probably don't even really know very well, but have convinced yourself that you do.
Right.
So in some ways it gives your mind this false sense of connection that can feed you for so long, but it's not nourishing. You know what I mean? It's like it's like people talk about breadcrumbs and dating, but I feel like longing itself is like just living on breadcrumbs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this would be a good time to ask you now about your TED Talk. I want to hear a little bit more about that, your TED Talk, How Longing Keeps Us from Healthy Relationships. I think you were just speaking to that, but staying here for a moment, talking about longing, and I just want to hear a little bit more about what that means to you.
Yeah. And do you want me to talk a little bit about like what limerence is for listeners who perhaps don't know?
Yes. Yeah, that'd be great.
And, you know, there are varying definitions out there. So this is not something I've memorized, but, and it's not in the DSM yet as like a disorder, so to speak. Right. There are disorders, so to speak, that are in the DSM that are like associated with limerence that make limerence, I think, easier to develop, like OCD and ADHD. But limerence is this like all-consuming preoccupation with someone. Sometimes people say it's romantic. That's usually what people have focused on is romantic limerence, although there are people out there that describe platonic limerence too. And what I focused on based on my own experience was romantic limerence. And it's just where it's like, also people describe it as major crushing, and where you're deeply fearful of rejection, and you are highly conscientious of any kind of sign that this person might like you, might be interested, might just know who you are, right? That's you get this high from it. And then there's this the significant low from any sense of rejection too. So it's like this roller coaster that in some ways, once you get used to it, it feels like fun and it feels normal. So that's how I understand limerence to be. It can, and when it's intense, it can just really be, can preoccupy your mind and get in the way of literally healthy relationships, which is what my TED Talk was about. It can get in the way of your work and even your friendships, right? Because your friends can be like, dude, why are you spending so much time obsessing over this person who may not even know you exist? Yeah. So to your question about the TED Talk, the TED Talk is kind of like a tiny version of what I wanted to write in my book, which I wrote this past year. And I didn't even have the word limerence when I was developing the talk. It was probably a couple months after I actually gave it on stage. I was sitting with my therapist. This therapist, I was meeting for coffee, like just friendly coffee. We don't see each other that often, but this was just an opportunity to like reconnect. And I was very grateful that she did. Not all therapists are willing to do that when you're not, you don't have a professional relationship with them anymore. Right. And she was like, you know what? I think all those years that I was seeing her, she was like, you were dealing with limerence. And I was like, what the heck is that? And then I went down the rabbit hole looking at all the crazy stuff that's online about it and the research and realized that's basically what my TED Talk was about without even realizing it. Yeah. And what I had been experiencing. So then I started kind of like peeling the onion and looking at all of these different layers, and it really helped me understand how I had gone through life for a long time, my dating, even since my teens. Like I feel like I was serial limerent. Okay. So I had lots of these little crushes that would just kind of keep my mind entertained, really.
Yeah, so. I get that completely. I mean, something that's coming to mind is Delulu is a Solulu. I say it all the time, but in moderation. Yes,
what is that?
You can what?
Say that again. I don't know that.
Oh, Delulu is a Solulu? Yeah.
Oh, like delusion is the solution?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
I think you have to flirt with delusion. I mean, it's about being and allowing our minds to be in this place of expansiveness, of curiosity, of creativity, of just what if, rather than what if it doesn't work out, right? What if it did? You got to flirt with that delulu a little bit and show yourself perhaps the way forward. I mean, it's the only way I've been able to do all the Flirt Coach things, the Flirtations, Flirtcast, everything, right? Because if I focused on the fear, the what could go wrong, the I'm not good enough, all of those thoughts, the scarcity mindset, well, I would have never taken that first step. So let me just be a little confidently delusional about my abilities and just see what could happen. Because I think our minds want to be, they want to play, right? They want to be creative, but up to, right, we can, when we go into full limerence with the limerent object, if it's a person when we're dating, if we're crushing on someone, I've also said, right, crushing is life. If I don't have a crush, am I even alive? But I can very much bring myself back to the moment versus having a lot of those dating experiences I feel like you were describing, where it was just, was I even dating? Was I having relationships, or was I just in a constant state of limerence with different people?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, like I said, that even at the beginning of my podcast, like longing can be this creative source too, right?
Yes.
So it can even get you to the point where you might actually ask that person out. And you because you can imagine the possibility. But the problem is when I think people get stuck and thinking about the possibility and not being proactive. And just keeping that person on a pedestal and not seeing their own flaws.
Right.
Because that also puts you in a tough position, because I feel like then you only expect this perfection from yourself.
Yes.
You know, the more you build that other person up, and then you're never going to ask them out because you see them as being flawless. So why would you feel like you deserve them? You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Yeah. And something else you mentioned that I think is very interesting and is important to acknowledge is that there is no, like in the DSM, limerence isn't there. It's a relatively new term that came about in the 60s and 70s from psychologist Dorothy Tenoff seems to have coined the phrase, or coined the word, but there's really not a lot of research out there. There's really not.
Actually, I've got her... I've got her book right here.
That's it.
Yeah.
Love and Limerence. Yes.
I wish I had read this like maybe even in my late 20s, although I think I needed to make a bunch of mistakes first.
Me too. But when you were talking about that, some of us, you know, if we have OCD, ADHD, maybe some other things happening in our brains and bodies, we may be more predisposed or inclined to experience limerence and get stuck in that limerent cycle, where it's very, very difficult to get out. How I feel like I understand limerence is this, like the limerent cycle where you have it's the limerent object. If it's the person, I feel like it could also be a habit, a place, an experience, right? Where we attach to something externally outside of ourselves. And with that attachment, we experience a lot of arousal, not necessarily positive or good feeling arousal, but we're very hyper alert, right? Hyper aware. A lot of our attention, energy, and focus is going to that external thing, the limerent object. And then when we receive, let's say if it's a crush, that's our limerent object, and they text us back, or they talk to us, or they compliment us, or they flirt with us, well, then we get that reward, right? The dopamine rush. And for us, receiving that creates a bond. And now we're like attaching a lot of significance and meaning to that bond. And because that reward felt so satiating, so gratifying, now we almost act out of need, compulsion, desperation sometimes, even a lack of awareness or control around our actions and behaviors. And then here we are in the limerent cycle.
Yeah. From what I understood from talking to this neuroscientist that I loved speaking with, Judd Brewer, he works at Brown University, and I think he's in charge of like the meditation center there even, which we can get to later.
Catch up with him.
Yeah, he'd be fascinating to have on your podcast.
Yes, he would.
But he really described it like you talked about it, like a cycle, but the limerent object itself is not the habit. The habit is like limerence is a habit. He described it. So it's like he described it as the behavior reward trigger behavior reward system. And the trigger might be to trigger you into limerence might be boredom, or it might be feeling lonely, or it might be anxiety about your future. And then the behavior is the longing, you know, ruminating about that person. And then the reward, what he described it actually as, it is the dopamine, but he reminded me that dopamine is what is the hormone released when we are anticipating getting something that we want.
Correct.
So it's not even getting it, right? But and then if you get that response, that person texts you back, they liked your post, you can see they actually read your text, you know, and then you get that high of like, oh my gosh, there's possibility, there's a chance, there's a chance. Yep. And I think that's the thing with limerence. It really feeds on, it's like this delicate balance of hope and uncertainty. If there's no uncertainty, limerence is gone.
Yeah.
That will kill. So that's why a lot of people also don't want to maybe even ask that person out, because then you'll know, right? And it's almost more fun to stay in that place of uncertainty and longing.
Yeah. Really, we're going to stay here for a minute, and great distinction about that dopamine is released before maybe the text or the compliment or something like that. It's like that, it's that anticipation chemical in many ways, which fuels the whole limerence cycle, or is at least a big part of it. But I want to ask you, we've been talking a little bit about it, but the difference or some of the differences between longing and limerence.
Well, I think longing is like the bigger, broad term, right?
Okay.
It's so abstract, and people, especially when I said my podcast or my book is on longing, people are like, what? You know, and I feel like it took a long time to even sell my book proposal until I heard the word limerence, because now it's culturally relevant and it's like a buzzword, you know, and you can like hashtag limerence. So, but longing, I feel like, is that bigger umbrella. And then limerence is like one example of that. Okay. And, you know, grief, I think, falls under the category of longing, or, you know, longing for another home, you know, searching Zillow like crazy, or longing for another job, or longing for, you know, another place. You talked about a place being almost like a limerent object. I love that, because I love travel, and I feel like it, you know, even thinking about it, right? Thinking about where you want to go next is that, I think, gives you that sense of a dopamine. Somebody actually said that, not somebody, but there was one research study that showed that people get more, I think it was dopamine, like more of a high basically from planning the vacation than actually taking it.
Are you looking at my notes, Amanda? I had this line from your TED Talk, which really stood out to me. And it's just that, where you said neuroscience says that our brain is actually wired to crave what we don't have. Something you mentioned in the intro to your podcast. And you also say that's why studies show that our brains release more dopamine when we're planning a vacation rather than actually taking it.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? Yes.
I know, it's kind of, I remember actually when I got, this kind of jumps way forward, but when I got engaged, to my now husband, Dave. And I remember thinking, gosh, like this feels like boring. Like what will I have to plan? What will I have to anticipate now? You know? And I feel like there was there had to be a shift in me where I felt I could find more satisfaction in this security and have and more possibilities. Like, it took me a while to see the opportunity for more possibilities within a relationship than before. I had been single for so long and dating for so long and dreaming of different men for so long that I loved all those different possibilities, the thought of all those different possibilities. So you see what I mean? Like the shift, like the planning, it took a while, and I just had to shift. I think now I plan and long for other things. So.
I mean, I relate to that. And certainly we can have an enjoyable time on the trip, the vacation, the experience, whatever. And then afterwards, it might be that longing for where we just were, or you're looking at the pictures or something like that, or you made videos or posted to social media or whatever. And what I wrote in my notes putting this together is, why is the present moment so boring to us? Why do we avoid the present moment at all costs?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I still wrestle with that.
Yeah.
So it's itchy. It feels uncomfortable. It feels, I don't know. I don't have a really great answer for that, because that's something I still work on. And, meditation for me is not something that comes easy. And I'd rather just be out running.
Totally.
That's where I feel like that's kind of my meditation, but it's still not really sitting still in the present. Totally. It's still trying to go from one place to the next, but I don't know. How do you deal with that?
I feel like I could answer that question, so I feel like a big thing that's trending right now on social media is the butterfly effect. And that's like something everyone's posting about. And sometimes I think if we had started this conversation even a second earlier or a second later, the whole thing would be different, right? The whole trajectory of the conversation stands to be very different. And so I think talking about limerence and longing, we're dreamers, right? We are always kind of maybe working towards something. And I think certainly if you live in a westernized society, we are so, I'll say, addicted to doing, to productivity, to making money, to always doing something, making something, being in motion, being in action to prove our worthiness, that we're good enough, that we can, right? Keeping up with the Joneses kind of thing. Because your competition, I'll tell you right now, the only way that I'm excelling, I'll say, in what I'm doing right now is because I'm doing more than my competition in many ways. I just am. I'm putting out 2 episodes a week, right?
That's incredible.
So there is some truth to doing, but I also have to be in that present moment. Something I say in my yoga classes a lot is be more, do less. You're in this room for the next 60 minutes. Here you are in the studio. There's nothing you need to do. If all you did was be here in Shavasana on your mat for 60 minutes, you just did yoga. And maybe that's what you need.
Yeah. Yeah. I always love when I mostly do yoga now on my app ever since COVID. But I used to love when my yoga teachers would be like, thanks for showing up. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, that's
the hardest
something.
part.
I got out the door, I showed up. I guess I think one thing also with longing is for me, my mind is always trying to. I always had trouble with decision making.
Yes,
and mostly because I was second guessing. I wanted to make the right decision, right? And so it's easier to stay in longing for someone or limerence because it keeps you from the fear of making a mistake. I think too, and so that goes back with I think it's easier to think about the future or to critique my mistakes from the past.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
totally.
I feel like I do. I mean, I can just beat the crap out of myself on decisions I made in the past. And
oh my God,
talking about the butterfly effect. Oh man, maybe if I had just done it that way, or I hadn't been so stiff on that date, maybe that guy would have not, maybe would have thought XYZ or whatever, just totally beat the crap out of myself. So.
Yeah. Well, this might be, a really good transition into some of the questions that we got from the flirties. I shared those with you. There were a lot. There were even more that came in. There's a lot of interest in this topic for sure, limerence, longing, and connection. I think let's do this first one, which you were just talking about, regret and guilt. This flirty says they feel guilty about longing for those past lovers, for a past relationship, for an ex, and it might even be someone that wasn't good for you.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me wonder, like, is this person in a serious relationship now, and that's why they're feeling guilty?
Yeah,
which, I think that there are a lot of people in these limerence support groups online and on Facebook that I've found those to be really interesting to be a part of. And there are a lot of married couples on there and also, well, I wouldn't say married couples, married individuals who are like, hey, I feel so awful about this. I can't get this person out of my head, and then I love my husband, but I can't stop thinking about this other person or like checking them out online. And then there are also the other side of like, I see limerence in my wife or my husband. How do I help them get out of it? And they're genuinely loving requests of trying to save their marriage. Okay. So that's one side of it. And so the question is, why do I feel guilty, or how do I stop feeling guilty?
Yeah, I think more so, because you were just talking about having some regret for maybe it's like the awkward flirt or the first date. We're like, oh, I should have said that. Or, oh, maybe they were flirting with me. Why didn't I see it? And so we have this regret maybe where we want to go back and have that corrective experience. If we could just change that experience, and then we could alleviate maybe whatever anxiety or discomfort we're experiencing in the present moment. I think guilt could also be a part of that, where I'm thinking of the listener that maybe stayed in a relationship too long, but they're not quite over that person, right? And they're having some guilt about, my gosh, how could I have this affection, this connection, this longing even for a past lover that, didn't treat me all that well?
I mean, I think some of that just comes down to self-forgiveness, and also paying attention to what patterns we're modeling from our own parents, and being aware of those patterns, and then B, just forgiving yourself, and also realizing, I think there's such a mindset also with perfectionism, like, oh my gosh, I messed it up. I messed up the one chance I had. And it depends on if you have that kind of soulmate mentality. I think that can really be destructive. I for a long time had this sense of like, I was obsessed with this idea of Superman. I know that might sound ridiculous to some people.
Not at all. I get it.
Like there's this one, it's so romantic to think about that, but then there's so crushing to think if you messed it up, that one chance. And my Japanese friend told me about this story of like the three Supermen. She was like, she had learned growing up this concept of the three Supermen, where you may meet all three, you may marry the first one. I feel like that's like a better idea to think of, that there are different options out there, and it's just a matter of timing. And if you feel like you messed it up, give yourself some grace, forgive yourself, and know that there's still, hope on the other side, and stop beating yourself up for potentially, wasting your time.
Right.
And that's wasting your time, beating yourself up, I feel
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I can relate to a lot of that, and making the distinction, if you were in an abusive relationship and maybe in that kind of cycle of going back to an abuser, that's, I think, a different conversation and question. But if you were dating someone, and just like you said, if in your mind you're like, oh, they're the one that got away, they were my Superman or Superwoman, that was my one chance. I've been that dater. I can think of a guy in particular, and it took me, the relationship wasn't that long. It was 5-6 months. It took me almost 2 years to really get over him, because I was stuck in this limerence cycle of just being fueled by self-sabotage, right? All the things I should have done, all the things I didn't do well or good enough, all the ways I messed up, right? Just going back, living in the past, wanting to change the outcome of what actually happened.
Yeah. And I mean, it comes down to, maybe we'll get to this eventually, but is self-love, which I know sounds so corny, I think, but
it's important.
It was, I remember my therapist was like, you need to believe you're worthy of love in order to move on into a healthy relationship. And I was like, you tell everybody this, don't you? And she goes, yeah, I do. But you really need
but
to
you. Yeah, I do talk about the self-love from time to time, because it's important. Right. It is. It truly is. I mean, it's because sometimes I'll hear from the flirties, it's like, but I do love myself, or I feel like, how much more do I have to love myself? How much further do I have to push this self-love thing forward before I just get to feel good enough? And I'm like, well, if you're still looking outside of yourself to have someone validate your worthiness, your good enoughness, then we're just not quite there yet.
Good point. Yeah.
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 Let's ask this question about detachment a little bit. So for the flirty that is, I think, developing some self-awareness, some, yes, consciousness around their maybe limerent actions and behaviors, how can they, because I get the variation of this question a lot, where it's like, I want to be in the present moment, like honor my thoughts, feelings, values, all that good stuff, and detach, but not become indifferent, not become uncaring.
You said detach?
Yeah.
Okay, detach from the person that you're that you've been in a relationship with,
or like that you're starting to date. Let's say that's the example. Mm-hmm.
I was like this. My personal background is that I feel like I was like an anxious, avoidant attacher. So it depended. If somebody got too close too fast, I would think something's wrong with them if they like me that much.
Okay.
Like, and then if somebody, and then if I was. So I would detach quickly. In fact, I remember telling my husband, like, if you get too close, I will fly. Yeah. And too close too quickly. And then from the other standpoint, people who are very avoidant, I was like, I will earn your love. I will catch you kind of, so I kind of flipped back and forth, but detaching and still being kind. I mean, for sure, like, just don't ghost people. It is the worst thing. It makes your life easier in some ways. Although I've read some studies that show that people who are doing the ghosting also have like this psychological fallout. Like it also, you may think it makes you feel better. It makes it easier, but there's still some lingering ick there. So just, it's better to, I think, just be clear and honest with folks. If it's not a good fit, then to drag someone along and leave them maybe for years in limerence.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. I mean, that's communication, clarity, knowing yourself, ultimately what you're looking for, your values, what type of lifestyle, what type of relationship you want, all that good stuff. And then just like giving yourself some patience also to not have all those answers right away. I mean, I've often said a lot of dating happens in the gray. And so you're not going to go on a first date and then second date, let's just say a week later, you're in a relationship with somebody. Probably not.
Yeah, so, I would say that's a red flag.
I would say just possibly that is moving too quickly.
Yeah. I like that idea that, a lot of dating happens in the gray zone. If it doesn't, then something is a little off. I think that's natural to have that ambiguity. So keeps it kind of fueled.
Definitely, because I want to support the flirties with making those really intentional, I hope, fulfilling connections. But if you exist chronically online like I do, scrolling on social media most of the day, a lot of dating advice lacks nuance. A lot of it lacks complexity. A lot of it lacks critical thinking. A lot of it lacks questions. It's presented as very black and white type of advice. And so a video you may see is, how to detach in the dating process, just don't care. And I don't like that. I don't like that. Let us ask this question. I mean, classic for someone experiencing limerence, is there a timeline for getting over someone?
Oh man, I wish I remembered. There's this great psychologist I spoke to in the UK. There's actually a lot of research going on in the UK about this, and Dr. Poerio is her name, and she did talk about like there are certain so many months that usually it lasts, but it can last up to 10 years. They interview people that or longer, and then it can be a week or something. It varies. It totally varies. And there's not like a pill you can take for it or, I think there are things you can do to stop, hitting your thumb with the hammer and staying in it. There are certainly things you can do, but I don't feel like it's a cold where it's like, oh, on average, your sinus infection is going to last like 2 weeks and then you're over.
Right.
There, you can certainly, you can drive it and keep it going longer than it necessarily needs to go.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think there's no right or wrong time frame for saying at this week mark or this month mark or this year mark, you have to be over limerence, or you have to be over this person, whether you were crushing, dating, in a relationship. Like, something that always comes to mind is Charlotte from Sex and the City, where I think it was it the quarter rule, where you grieve or mourn the loss of a relationship a quarter of the time that you were with that person. So if it was a month, it takes you a week. You got a week, girl. Or guy, whatever, he, she, them. And after a week, you're done. Time to move on. And I'm like, well, maybe it's something that's helped me. So if that's helping you, it's there for you.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, just like grief for the death of someone, it takes different people, they deal with it differently. So
yes.
I mean, I still dream about a couple of these guys that were my limer objects for the longest time. And, especially before I was in a healthy relationship, I would think, oh, this is my subconscious telling me I need to reach back out to them. And it's like my mind still chews on it, years later. I'm like, why did I still have that dream about John? And like, there's some random things. And I'll tell my husband about them. And usually he'll listen patiently, but
I found that finding gratitude for what you had with someone, even if it's no more, or what you learned from being with that person, can help you move on to a healthy relationship. At one point, about 10 years ago, I wrote an essay where I basically wrote down something I was thankful for several guys that I had dated in my past that I'd had a hard time letting go of. And I think by writing down those gratitudes, it helped me let go and be in a healthier place.
Yeah. I mean, this question came through. It's like, is there a distinction or difference between longing and missing somebody? Like, I wonder, what's the difference in longing for something that has yet to happen, or longing for something in the future, versus longing or perhaps missing something from our past?
Well, I think kind of like back to the umbrella with longing and limerence being a piece of that. I think missing is potentially a piece of limerence, or longing. Now we're getting those gets kind of crazy with all these words.
All the L words.
I think you can certainly be missing someone and not have limerence for them.
Correct. Okay.
And similarly, I think you could have limerence for someone and not really be missing them if you don't really know them. But it's tricky, because I feel like I have a chapter in my book called The Stranger, because I feel like in a lot of ways, limerence is about missing someone you never really knew. So
yeah.
I think you might convince yourself you're missing them, but yeah, it's tricky.
That is, that's really interesting. And let's talk about one of the themes in your book that you were just talking to. It's this missing or having limerence with someone that you've perhaps never met, or you never knew. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
I don't feel. I mean, when I describe the stranger in my book, let's see, how do I unpack all this? Like, there are people that I hooked up with every couple years. I would meet this guy in Chicago or out here. And the truth of it was I really didn't know him. He never really quite let me in. And then I think there are people that I've seen in these limerent groups that talk about limerence for someone that perhaps they've seen online, but they've actually never even met in person. And there is a bit of a stranger factor there too, I think. Especially if you never had any exchanges with them. Right. And then I think there's borderline, I don't know if you've heard of parasocial relationships, where people are obsessed about movie characters, or I've heard of people having book boyfriends, right? Where they just spend, it's not quite limerence, I think, but there's this fine line. I think they kind of cross over a little bit. And that is you don't know that person. That person doesn't even exist. It's a character, right? But you will give up time with your friends to carve out hours to sit and watch this character on Netflix. Right. So,
and
anyways,
it really translates for me to social media, where it's I'm sometimes I wonder, Amanda, do you think anyone's in a parasocial relationship with me? Sometimes I wonder, am I someone's limerent object?
Oh, I bet. I mean, as much as you're out there.
I know. And this is the difference, is I'm not a character. It's my real name on everything. That's my government name. It is me making those videos, and I talk a lot about myself and my experiences and my life and my thoughts and my feelings. And yeah, it's me. So, but it's kind of how I unpack it in my mind a little bit is, for me, it's a one to many. So there's one of me, there's many flirties, which is amazing. And I love that. For the flirties, it's more of a one-to-one is what I'm trying to say. It's one of them and then one of me. So I think just the way social media works, and especially something like a podcast, I mean, I'm in your ear right now or coming through your car speakers or something, just as you are. And so we can develop a little bit more of that intimate relationship. Whereas as we're recording this in the Flirt Coach virtual studios, it's just the two of us right now.
Right. That's a great point. I mean, I think social media gives us this false sense of connection.
Little bit
with someone, and it's a perfected image too, right? So we're seeing
oftentimes, yes.
I mean, who would you be? I haven't seen a picture of you without your mustache.
Oh, I don't think I've had it consistently for a couple years now. Oh my God, That almost made me choke. I could throw one up on stories or something like that. But yeah, I'm not posting like me on stories waking up in the morning.
Right. And so I would think, that brings us to the other side of like the flip coin of like I didn't say that correctly.
Other side of the coin.
Other side of the coin, right. Is that these limerent objects, if they're not like these, they are real people, right? And that I think sometimes I think people in limerence can go too far too with, and you got to give somebody space. If somebody says they're not interested in you or they've given you clear signs and maybe you're not picking up on them, but your friends have, you have to give them space and realize there can be borderline stalking in some of the stories I've read about limerence too. So, it's just like putting yourself in their shoes, back to that idea of detaching, like realizing that this person, Benjamin, is, this real guy, even though he's putting himself out there for everybody to hear his own struggles and share all of these other people's stories through him. He's a real person with, with his own fears. So I think people forget that when they put him on a pedestal.
Yeah. And it's just also in my everyday, normal life, it's like, I just have a very normal life still. I don't know how long it's going to be quote unquote normal, but I don't get recognized. I have my part-time
Are you a celebrity
jobs,
at Trader Joe's?
I maybe once a month, maybe. Or if people recognize me, more often than not, they just don't say anything. But I just do my shifts and I teach my yoga classes and I record my podcast and I make content and I clean my apartment and take my cat to the vet and just do stuff. It's off camera. My life is just very normal in many ways. Although I would say I'm doing a lot of things that aren't quote unquote normal. Not everyone has a podcast. Not everyone is calling themselves the Flirt Coach because there's only one.
I actually, on a side note, I actually had a couple great dates with this guy I asked out from Trader Joe's. He took me fly fishing and so just a side note. Shout out to Bruce out there.
Shout out to Bruce. I appreciate that side note. All right, let us get into, oh my God, I just looked at the time. Whoa. I wanted to ask you this question here that I think really fuels into the limerence conversation about how online dating and social media and hookup culture, one thing you were talking about earlier that really struck me is that this feeling of uncertainty a lot of us have. And limerence might be a very nice distraction for our brains. And so maybe how our digital lives and dating digitally really fuels limerence.
Yeah. The social media and online dating, I mean, they are fuel for limerence because they just leave you hanging in limbo with uncertainty. Also hookup culture too, because there's a woman that I often reference and who I interviewed who studied hookup culture in America. And she talked about these like main rules with hookup culture. And one of them is that it's supposed to be meaningless, right? You're not supposed to act like you're invested. You're supposed to play it cool. And that just leaves everybody in limbo. It's such a horrible, uncomfortable place to be, but it totally opens the door for limerence, because then, you can imagine that maybe that person did think it was meaningful, as meaningful as you thought it was. And then you can just like stalk them on social media until they maybe respond to your text. So it's social media, online dating, and hookup culture are all fuel for limerence. So if that's something you're trying to avoid, then pay attention to how much time you're spending in those activities, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, talking about dopamine being a part of this, I mean, swipe culture, social media, all of that, getting those notifications absolutely can mimic and does mimic and mirror the release of dopamine in this limerence cycle as well. And I love what you just mentioned about how hookup culture is supposed to be meaningless, and we're all pretending like we're not catching feelings or getting our heart hurt, or worse, just longing in limerence with someone that we had, a one night stand with. I'm like, when are we just going to start being truthful that hookup culture is it? I'm not, and I'm, want to present myself as sex positive, and I am, but we've got also got to recognize that I think hookup culture is really detrimental to connection in many ways, I think.
Yeah, I think like the sex positive word gets thrown around a lot, and it, I honestly don't think, well, how do I say this? I mean, sex positive can be seen different ways, like hooking up with somebody and being respectful and showing you cared and communicating with them can be also very sex positive.
Yes.
Just as much as like saying, okay, I, screwed 5 guys this month and I feel more confident and sexy than I ever have, and I'm totally okay never talking to them again. That's one way. And the other way, if that doesn't work for you, and you are somebody who connects, I think I tried using alcohol a lot to basically numb those feelings, catching those, and just try to plow forward into hookup culture. And eventually I was like, I literally started disassociating in hookups, and shaking and crying, because it was like my body was finally like, enough.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you know it's enough, without you voluntarily telling yourself it's enough.
Yeah.
So I think there are lots of variations of sex positivity, and people just, like you talked about earlier, just need to be more aware of what they're comfortable with.
Yes.
And be confident in that, even if it doesn't seem to be trending at the moment.
Yeah. I love that. We're going to stay here. I have 2 more questions I want to ask you. This first one, continuing with this part of the conversation, and you wrote an article for the New York Times, and were interviewed by Katie Couric about late in life virginity. And so I'd love to hear just a little bit more, especially like I was listening to the other part of your TED Talk, or maybe this was on your podcast where you were talking about that experience on set being interviewed and kind of when the cameras went off. But yes, if you could share a little bit about that part of your story.
Yeah, man, it's hard to unpack all of that. But I didn't have sex until I was 41. And it was probably in my mid 30s where I was like, I was waiting for a loving and committed relationship. That's what I say. That's what I was not that that's what I say, but that's what I had been saying all along. And that's what I'd been writing. But I figured out basically I was self-sabotaging by dating people who were never going to commit. I had in my mid 20s, I had been in a serious relationship with a guy, and I said, okay, I'm ready to have sex. And I was probably 25, 26, and he was in the military, and he said no. And he was leaving for Iraq. And I reeled that back in. It'd take me a while to get to the point where I feel comfortable enough to go there with somebody. Yeah. And then I kind of went on a dating rampage afterwards, kind of like, okay, well, I can hook up with a lot of people. I'm not going to have sex with them. And it's a lot to unpack in like a couple minutes, but
I know.
That was the basic, I think, story is that like a lot of people, whether they're having sex or not, they often self-sabotage because it's scary getting into a secure relationship where you might, say yes to love with somebody with their arms wide open. Yeah. So I just continued to pursue people who were emotionally and physically unavailable. And with regards to I wrote this essay in the New York Times called, said the title was, Does My Virginity Have a Shelf Life? And the Katie Couric show brought me on in the spring after it was published and really drilled me with a lot of questions. And I left feeling really kind of shattered, like, oh, this was something that was really important to me. And they basically, I felt really mocked on stage for it. Yeah. Off camera, she was like, she said, people here at the studio just think you have fairy tale princess syndrome and you just need to have sex. And, for somebody who'd just gone on stage and just spilled their guts and their heart and tried to be as genuine as possible, I felt really kind of like I'd been spanked by, this journalist that I respected. So after that, I kind of went on a search to figure out, okay, was I like delusional? Like, a little bit of delusion is okay, like you talked about, perhaps, but was it keeping me from getting into a healthy relationship? So I had to kind of look at my own habits and patterns around perfectionism and what really mattered to me and look at what I had been doing and who I was actually investing my time in to get onto a better path.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Cause that part of your story struck me where it's like, here you are being open, vulnerable and genuine, sharing a really personal story to a national audience, even international audience. And then the takeaway from that is just have sex. Like that if it were that easy, I feel like that would have happened. Right. Of course that was always an option. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, people often say, rip the Band-Aid off. Just, why didn't it just happen when you fell in love with that guy in high school, the blah, blah, blah. But everybody has different paths. And I think
exactly
people blossom at different times. So, and it goes back to just giving yourself some more grace, forgiveness at times, and realizing really everybody's on a different path and a different timeline.
Absolutely. And so the final question I have for you here, this has been so much fun. I want to ask you, just leaving the flirties with a couple strategies to break their limerence patterns and habits. So a couple of ways perhaps that you learn to manage your own limerence.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you asked that. It seemed like a lot of people were asking for questions of like, okay, how do I get out of this? And that's something that I try to weave through my book. Not just part of it is, I think, looking back at your past and looking at your patterns and seeing what's motivating you. Therapy was really helpful for me. And the one thing that my therapist told me to do was to write in my journal, I'm ready for and worthy of a deeply loving and intimate relationship. So I started writing that in my journal. I didn't really probably believe it at the time, but the more you write those things down, I think then you have a better chance of actually getting into that healthy relationship that you deeply desire. I think the journaling can be really helpful for people who are really highly ADHD. I read another study that said like just free writing can actually not be good because your ruminating mind will just take over and but more writing especially one of the coolest studies I read was where you actually write a beginning, middle, end, especially if you don't have an ending to your story and somebody feels like they've just ghosted you, you make sense of it. You create meaning. And I think that's what a lot of us are looking for. And maybe that's why we're looking to the past and the future so much for that meaning. Yeah. So that's one interesting thing was writing. And I feel like after I got to then my book, writing it, and I came across that research, I was like, that's what I did for years. I basically kind of wrote myself into a healthy relationship. So, and if writing's really not your, your go-to sort of thing, meditation is something that over and over neuroscientists and psychologists say that's supposed to be helpful, help you, stay more in the present. Sharon Salzberg has some great YouTube videos that are like 10 minutes on loving kindness meditation. So it's not just, it's giving yourself that loving and kindness, but it's also, kind of like giving that to those out there that you may feel hurt by. And it's an easier way of letting them go in your head. And a couple other strategies. One of the most interesting things I talked to Candace Bushnell, Sex and the City.
I would die to interview her for such a show.
I was so nervous.
Oh my God.
And I interviewed her for this Vogue story. And
die.
I said, how do you get over big? Like everybody's got a big in their life, somebody who kind of mistreated them a little bit, but you're still somewhat so drawn to them. And she said, you become them. You become the one. And I think that's so true for a lot of us with the crushes that we have, that we're so drawn to these people because they have characteristics that we want to embody. And I think if we can recognize that, of course you don't want to totally become that other person, but recognize what qualities about those people that you really appreciate them, but don't feel like you have to like own that person to embody those characteristics. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Not changing yourself to be them.
Exactly.
But what I oftentimes will hear, and this is what I've read, and when I do my flirt search, it's like when you have a crush or like you're really kind of deeply in love, infatuation, obsessed, and limerence with somebody, it's because they have qualities about themselves that you wish you had, but like the twist is you do have, they're just hidden. Right. You haven't maybe realized your full potential. And so something like that, like you see a part of yourself in them, but they are maybe just a little bit, I'll say, kind of further ahead in maybe their creative pursuits or their self-love journey or input anything there. So it's not necessarily them or like the physical attraction. It's like the qualities about themselves that you see within you, but like, maybe you're just like, you don't identify or really connect to that part of yourself yet. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that kind of goes back to the perfectionism piece of it too. Like you think that being with them will perfect you, will make everything okay. But coming back to finding yourself worthy of love, whether you have to, I love all the talk about there, like you don't have to earn their love is so important. So that finding yourself as being whole without them, and then you're in a healthier place, I think, to pursue love.
Oh my gosh. I have loved this conversation so much. Amanda McCracken, thank you for being on Flirtations today. I cannot wait to debut. I want to make sure and send all the flirties your way, to the book, to the podcast, to your TED Talk. Anything else you want to share or offer here? Yeah. Where can the flirties find you?
Well, thank you. This has been really fun. Definitely, you've asked a lot of questions that I feel like hopefully will help a lot of people. And
I think so.
And people can find me on Instagram at Amanda J. McCracken.
Okay.
And look for my book, When Longing Becomes Your Lover, coming out in February.
Okay.
And the title actually came from a session I had with my therapist when she was like, Amanda, longing is your lover. And I was like, oh, crap. I got to figure that out. And then, and the podcast is the Longing Lab, where we explore not just romantic longing, but all sorts of different kind of longing.
Amazing. I will have
thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. All those links will be in the show notes below for this episode. Amanda McCracken, thank you for being on Flirtations today.
Thank you.
All right, Flirties, that's a wrap on this episode of Flirtations, the episode all about limerence, longing, and my favorite thing in the world, connection, with our special guest for this conversation, Amanda McCracken. Thank you, Amanda, for being on the show today and sharing more about yourself, your story, and your work with me and the Flirties. Some great links below in the show notes for this episode to Amanda's podcast, her TED Talk, Instagram, a couple of articles, all there for you to learn more about her work, do a deeper dive on some of the topics we explored today, just touching the surface in many ways. All of that there for you. Thank you, Amanda, for being on the show. And the Flirties, thank you. Thank you for being here. Couldn't do any of this without you. Please rate, review, subscribe to the show if you haven't already. If you have, thank you. I really appreciate it. If you haven't, please do so now. It's a great time to leave a 5-star review is the number that's coming to mind. Yeah, 5 stars. And then share this episode or another favorite episode of Flirtations with a friend, someone you want to share BFE, big flirt energy with, so we can share the mission of the flirt all over the world. I think that's what I want to say today as I conclude this episode. Signing off officially here at Flirt Headquarters. My name is Benjamin. I'm the Flirt Coach and Gay Libra Flirty. Happy flirting.